Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project start video for this 1/6 scale Cadillac Gage V100, also known as the M706 Armored car. Now, I'm pretty sure a large number of my subscribers are probably at this point here scratching their heads, as this build here is something that's very different from my usual type of model builds, and hell, even I myself am surprised that I have one of these models sitting here on my table in my workshop. So we're going to go ahead and go over exactly what this thing is and where the hell it came from in this video, so stay tuned. Now, like I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. However, before everyone starts running to their Outlook program, this model here I will not be offering any commission build services for, because this model here is a one-off scratch build. In order to do a commission build on this model here, I would have to scratch build this vehicle, and that's not a service that I offer commission builds for. Scratch build commission builds would require far too much time to undertake, and with my schedule, I'm just way too busy, so that's not going to be an option. So this guy here is just going to be a one-off for basically your enjoyment to watch. Now, before I go ahead and roll up my sleeves and dig into this model over here, I'm going to go ahead and lay some ground rules first on what type of a build and to what extent the detailing is going to go on this model, as well as probably answer as many of the basic questions that I'm pretty sure I'm going to be asked frequently as this build progresses. Now, before I actually roll up my sleeves and dig into this project, I'm going to go ahead and lay some ground rules right off the bat. First of which being exactly what type of build and extent of a build that is going to be going into this model here, since I know I'm going to be getting asked a lot of these questions, not only in the comment section in this video below, but also in the future videos that I have on the ongoing progress of this build all the way up until completion. Starting with the first question that I know I'm going to be asked is, what was this vehicle and what period or era was it used in? This model here is a Cadillac Gage V100 Armored car. This vehicle was designed by the company Cadillac Gage in the 1950s and the 1960s for really an export light armored car. Now, during this time, the U.S. military was involved in the Vietnam War, and the military police really had a use for a vehicle of this type. Throughout the Vietnam War period, the U.S. military acquired the Cadillac Gage V100 Commando. When it entered U.S. service, redesignated the M706, and this vehicle was heavily used by the U.S. military and ARVN units during the Vietnam War. Now, outside of military use, the Cadillac Gage V100 was a very popular and was a very successful light armored car design. A large number of these vehicles were built and were shipped to many countries throughout the world. And in many places of the world, even today, these vehicles are very common and are still in use. Not to mention this vehicle, but also many of the improved and updated versions that came after this pattern that we have here. Now, for my model here, I'll be building it as a Vietnam War era U.S. Army M706. So the details and fittings are going to be mounted to this model are going to be more indicative for that type of a vehicle compared to some of the other foreign contract V100s that were made throughout the years that came after the Vietnam War time frame. And of course, as the build goes on, I'll be going over more of these details and fittings as the build progresses. Okay, with that out of the way, this now leads us to the kit that's sitting here on my table at this time. This model here was not built by me at all. This build here was started by another 1/6 scale customizer, and the build actually dates back to, I want to say, the mid-2000s time frame, or possibly even earlier than that. At this point, there was an individual on one of the action figure news groups who had the idea on producing a limited run of these models. He was going to build them, paint them, and sell them to the 1/6 scale community. which is actually a very common trait that is seen in the 1/6 scale hobby, and in many of the kits that you've seen on the ECA channel started off on very similar lines. Note, of course, the, well, SDKFZ 222 build that I did a number of years ago. Unlike that build, though, which utilized water jet cutted parts and was designed to be a kit, the model that you see here was intended to be a fully built and painted just display piece that you would purchase from the individual, and you would get it in a ready-to-display condition. Also, unlike the 222, where again it utilized more machine-made parts, this model here was all comprised of handmade and hand-cut panels, which were hand-fitted together and assembled to the state that you see it here. Now, unfortunately, the amount of work required to hand-cut all of the panels of plastic and to actually fully get the models built, painted, and ready for display proved to be more expensive than what the market at the time was willing to pay, and this is actually a common occurrence that happens with a lot of these limited produced items. So the builder was able to build, I believe, 3 of these models that you see here, one of which he was able to fully complete, paint, and weather, and that model he sold off on eBay, and the other 2 never really got past the point that you see here, and this is one of those models. Now, the model that we have here basically sat in the guy's storage shed for a number of years, and that now fast forwards us to the autumn of 2019. During this time, I went ahead and did a YouTube video detail walk around of a real Cadillac Gage V100, albeit a slightly different variant than this one here, but it's the same chassis nonetheless. After the builder of this model saw that video, he went ahead and contacted me on a possible, project for me to work on. To which, of course, I'm not going to turn that down. I mean, how often is it that you get a chance to work on a model like this? So he went ahead and basically gave me the model for a really good deal, and the model was delivered to the ECA shop and has been here now for the last 4 or 5 months or so. Now, currently, there are no 1/6 scale V100 armor car kits on the 1/6 scale marketplace. So this model here is basically just going to be a one-off piece for my own personal collection and is not going to be for sale and or purchase. With that out of the way, this now leads us to what exactly I'm going to be doing with this build. First and foremost, this model here is going to be built as a static model. This is probably going to upset a lot of people, but I am not going to make this one RC because, simply put, the way the model is built to this condition over here, to make it RC, I basically need to rip the entire thing apart and start from the ground up again, which kind of negates the whole point of having the model already in the configuration that you see here with its hull. So this one here is just going to be your standard static model, like many of the other 1/6 scales that are non-armor tech that are found on my channel. Now, for the actual detailing on this build, I know a lot of people are going to probably compare this with my last armor car build, which was the SDKFZ 222, which that build was, honestly, I watched those videos sometimes wondering how the hell I even was able to get that model built. This build here, on the other hand, is going to be a lot more simpler compared to that one because this model here will not be getting a fighting compartment interior. And once I show the model off more, you'll basically see why that's not going to be an issue. So this model here is going to be exclusively as an exterior static build. Even though this model is being built as static and doesn't have any interior detailing, that doesn't mean I'm going to be skimping on the remainder of the vehicle's overall external detailing. Keep in mind, this is an EastCoastArmory.com build, so it is going to be getting the extensive ECA package, which will include all of the external details and fittings that one might imagine. Now, although there are no other 1/6 scale V100 armor car kits on the market, all of the pieces that I'm going to be designing for this model here will be listed for sale on the EastCoastArmory.com catalog. In fact, I'm going to have an entire page devoted just to the V100 armor car. Now, if anyone's scratching their heads wondering why would I release parts for a model that there's a non-existent kit for, well, quite simply put, that's literally how I started ECA. So if anyone is in a similar situation where you're scratch building one of these models, or if a kit does materialize at some point, you'll be able to have the entire detailed fittings for the vehicle at your disposal, ready to go. Now, on the topic of the parts, I do want to point out that unlike many of the other older 1/6 scale builds that are found on the ECA channel, where predominantly the parts were comprised of either cast resin pieces or hand-bent and soldered metal pieces, This model here is going to be utilizing primarily 3D printed components, which is a huge step away from my normal mediums. Now, if anyone's been watching the more recent ECA 1/6 scale builds that have been coming out lately, you'll notice that I've been slowly moving away from cast iron and bits to components made with this new medium. By doing this does have several advantages, of which I'll be going over again as the build progresses, but that is something to keep in mind throughout the duration of this build here. So let's go ahead and take a quick walk around of this model at the project start. Now, like I said before, the model was built entirely of hand-cut styrene panels. The styrene pieces the designer used was actually a very good quality. They were about 1/8 of an inch thick, which does have some nice rigidity to it, and the model is nice and sturdy. However, with this medium, the vehicle is actually very light. Obviously, once the suspension components go on, this is more than likely going to change. Now, overall, the size and the scale of the vehicle seem to be pretty good. There are some tweaks and changes I'm going to be making to some of the geometry of a handful of the panels, but again, I'll go over that once the build actually really starts commencing. The designer went ahead and did all of the details that you see here, and the model's details are rather simplistic, but do give you the look and feel of the V100 Armored car, and all the pieces look to be appropriately shaped and sized, and the model was, again, it was actually a fairly nice piece. Now, you notice that the doors were actually all static, none of which were functional, and were basically just glued in the sections that you see here. The model does feature 2 working hatches found here on the bow section. Note the lack of any interior detailing, as these models were originally intended just to be exterior display only. Now, the hatches themselves basically are similar or more representable of a more early production rendition of the V100, because the later ones featured these bubble dome sections over these 2 hatches to better accommodate the operators wearing helmets. But yeah, more information on that is to come. Now, moving to the inside, like I said before, the model is purely designed for exterior display only. And on the inside, you can see how the designer went ahead and laid out the interior panels with bulkheads to make sure that the model was nice and sturdy. And in that regard, he did a very good job because, again, the model was put together very well. Now, the panels are all glued together with some kind of a rubbery type glue. I guess it's liquid nails. Looks like it came out of a silicone gun, so it's not hot glue. We can rule that out. But having said that, the panels do seem to be holding up pretty well. Now, during the construction, I'm more likely going to be reinforcing things with super glues and other sorts of adhesives just to make sure that everything stays where it needs to be as the model ages. Now, you'll notice that the model did suffer some damage from shipping. Right over here, there's a small crack. Of course, this will be addressed once the build really commences. Here we have the turret. You'll notice that the turret originally had a hatch in this section over here, which is true for the M706, but it also was a casualty of the shipping. Makes no difference. I'm going to be going ahead and making all the hatches functional on this model once, again, I dig into it. Here we have the pistol ports. The guy did the tombstone-shaped pistol port hatch, and he even took a little piece of wire and bent it around to detail it up as the, I believe it's a stop or a splash guard. Moving further, now brings us to the bow where we have the headlights and the brush guards. Now, the brush guards are made from brass, and they are actually soldered together, which is a nice touch. In fact, it's kind of the way I've been making brush guards for the last number of years. Now, the lights themselves, they're very basic in their overall detailing. I don't know where they come from, but I have here a loose one, which broke off during the shipping, and this thing is insanely heavy. It's actually way heavier than it looks. Now, these are not going to be utilized on this build. I'm going to be swapping them out with new replacement detail sets, which, of course, I'll be developing, and more information on that is to follow. Here we have the front hatch. Now, on the real 706, this is a access point to get access to the winch mechanism, which is located in this section over here. It's a key piece of detailing found on this vehicle, and more information on that is to come. Now, back up to the turret. Now, the turret on this model is, again, fabricated by the builder, and he did a decent job with the turret itself. It does have the distinctive M706 shape to it. I already went over the hatch. The piece has two little locking tabs, and they lock in with a twist-out format. And the real 706 would have an option for various amount of machine guns that you could put on it, from the 1919 to the M2 and also the M87. Now, the model here is very basic with its overall detailing. Here we have a little claw tarpaulin, which is made from, looks like a piece of fabric with a metal wire frame in it. And here we have the hinging mechanism. It's overall decently made. However, I'm still on the fence of whether or not I'm going to keep this turret or replace it with a new unit. More information on that is to come. Moving our way back, we have the axis for the engine. Now, on the real unit, again, we have this distinctive air duct, which would be located in this section over here. The hatch would split in half and would open in the two opposite directions to get to the engine bay. And here we have a exhaust duct. Now, on the real unit, this here would be a set of louvers, and then you could actually see the exhaust manifold inside. On the model here, he just made it out of slats of sheet styrene, or I believe they might be corrugated styrene. Regardless what they are, he did an adequate job fabricating it, but this is probably going to be revised when I actually get to this build. Moving down the back, you can see how the duct is actually kind of integrally part of the rear plate, and the builder did do an adequate job with that respect. Here we have the rear door sections, as well as the top section over here. These hatches are going to be revised and are more likely going to be made functional again as the build progresses. Here we have a taillight, very basic in its overall shape and quality, and this will definitely be something I'll be phased out with a more highly detailed rendition. Now, with the model flipped over, here you can see the undercarriage and exactly what I'm going to be dealing with. Now, the builder went ahead and incorporated into the side of the hull here these two plastic pieces that stick out, which basically fill in for the detailing, which would be for the leaf springs as well as the differential. And this is a common trait that is done on a lot of 1/6 scale homebrew model kits. In fact, the 222 model that I built a number of years ago originally would have had a feature like this that obviously I went ahead and swapped it out for a better detailed suspension. This model here will be getting a very similar type of a suspension system, but again, more information on that is to develop. Now, for his axles, the guy went ahead and has a brass tube that is connected via a threaded shaft, and the wheels would just thread on. Now, the model was originally utilizing large RC truck wheels, but for this vehicle here, I'm actually going to custom tool up the appropriate detailed wheels for the Cadillac Gage V100. Now, for use as a filler and again as an ad hoc differential, he used this, looks like a rubber fuel line of some sort, and this is going to change once I actually dig into the build. Here we have on the bottom plate. Now, this is one area of the build that I'm also going to correct. You notice that the fellow who built this used 3 pieces of plastic. On the real V100, I can attest to this as seeing the real one in person. It's actually one continuous plate, so this is going to be addressed once I really dig into the meat of this. Similar can also be said about the wheel wells here. You can see how they just have an inner box shape, and this is going to be revised to give it a little bit more accuracy. Now, here you can see that adhesive that the builder used. I guess you could say kind of has a weld line type appearance to it, but again, this will be, should I say, cleaned up a bit during the actual building progress. Now, moving towards the front, and this is also true for the rear, the V100 does have these little tow hooks that are found in these 2 front corners here, and the builder, to his credit, did go ahead and fabricate these pieces of detailing. Well, that's basically it for the model's introduction. From here, I can now go ahead and actually dig into the build and start doing some repairs, as well as also a few alterations to the vehicle's body in order to improve it from its base state. More information on this is, of course, going to follow in the next project update video, which should drop shortly after this video here. And with that, that wraps up this project start video for this 1/6 scale American Cadillac Gage V100 Armored car. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on project update videos for projects like, well, this one over here, as well as the other ongoing projects that frequently get posted on this channel, as well as the smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in the loop with new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, you'll see more photographs of this particular build that are going to continuously get posted as the project trucks along, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been posted on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. See you next time.